The crowd shifted uneasily as she forced her way through, her voice low but edged with venom. "This isn't over, Margaret," she hissed, storming away with a glare that seemed to burn through the people around her. Phones were raised instantly, capturing every movement, every expression. Within an hour, every social media platform in town would buzz with the footage. I returned to my hotel room, settling into the familiar chair by the window, tablet in hand, determined to document the day's events with precision. Jessica's counterattack, so carefully plotted, was unraveling because it relied on lies too transparent to endure scrutiny. The community knew me too well to accept wild accusations of instability or vindictiveness, but the claim about pregnancy gnawed at me. If it were true, the complications it introduced could be significant. I needed facts before acting, not assumptions or manipulations. I picked up my phone and called Dr. Taylor's office, ready to verify any potential emergency. Real medical crises deserved assistance, but false alarms were tools of control, and I refused to be manipulated. Jessica's public threats had crossed every boundary, and her tactics were becoming audacious. An hour later, a knock sounded at my hotel room door. Mike Stevens, Sunset Manor's night security guard, stood there. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, his voice calm yet serious. "That young woman from earlier, she came back about 30 minutes ago. Stood outside your door for 10 minutes, then left." Some other guests were unnerved. Mike, a retired officer, had witnessed enough trouble to identify it before it escalated. "Did she say anything specific?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tension. "Muttered something about teaching old ladies lessons. We've got it all on security footage," he replied. Physical evidence existed, tangible proof of her intimidation on private property. "Would you be willing to share that with the police?" I inquired. "Absolutely," he said firmly. "No one should feel threatened in their own home." The next morning, I arrived at the police station, armed with Mike's DVD and a detailed written timeline of Jessica's escalating behavior. Detective Martinez reviewed every piece of evidence with meticulous care. "Margaret," he said, "there's a clear escalating pattern here. Combined with what I witnessed yesterday at the bank, there's legal grounds for a restraining order." I wanted details. "What does that mean?" "It legally prohibits Jessica from coming within 300 feet of you or your property. Violation triggers immediate arrest." His expression darkened as he added, "One more thing you need to know, she consulted a lawyer yesterday about tenant rights." The word struck like a cold wave. Squatters' rights. She had researched how to claim legal standing in my own apartment. Martinez explained the law. Continuous occupation of 6 months is required, and she had been there 8. Despite her intentions, the facts were clear. No lease, no utilities paid, and the property remained mine. "She planned this in advance," he continued. "Premeditation. Months of scheming aimed at securing my home. The restraining order could be expedited, and by afternoon, Judge Williams had signed it. Jessica Thompson was legally barred from approaching within 300 feet. Her attempt at control had been stopped cold. Returning to my car, I began making strategic calls. First was Karen Webb at Millfield Credit Union. "Miss Webb, David Patterson no longer resides at my address. He listed it falsely on loan applications. He was a guest. If you need him, he's at Mountain Coffee on 1st Street, then Pacific Collection Services. David Patterson has no ownership interest in my property. He no longer lives here." Each call was precise, correcting misinformation without offering personal details. By lunchtime, I had contacted 4 different collection agencies. David's carefully built web of lies was collapsing under its own weight. Later that afternoon, the restraining order arrived, signed and enforceable. Immediate legal consequences awaited any violation. My phone buzzed an unknown number. "This isn't over, old lady." Forwarded to Detective Martinez, then blocked. Collecting evidence had become instinctual, a necessary measure to protect myself. Wednesday, I filed the restraining order with the court. By noon, I observed the first cracks in David and Jessica's FOD. The courthouse clerk stamped the final copy, effective immediately. Any contact within 300 feet meant arrest. Jim Miller, David's boss at Mountain Coffee, called. "Margaret, are the things David claims about you true?" he asked cautiously. I explained the falsehoods. No mental breakdown. No family emergency, just lies designed to manipulate. Jim's skepticism softened. He had known me for 15 years and recognized the truth. I'll have to let him go, he admitted. This controversy affects business and trust. Meanwhile, David called, panic evident in his voice. Mom, they're at the apartment asking about debts, assets, income, everything. I calmly explained the truth. These consequences were the result of actions he and Jessica had taken. For the first time, David faced reality. Jessica's fabricated medical bills and manipulations could no longer shield him. The sheriff served the restraining order, and Jessica reacted predictably, screaming, throwing objects, desperate. Her recklessness made her actions predictable. I returned to Sunset Manor, reflecting on the limited options for someone in her position. Desperation. Force patterns and predictable patterns could be managed. David had a choice to make: remain loyal to deception or accept the reality he had ignored. For 8 months, I had protected them from consequences. Now, the responsibility rested with them. The weight of truth pressed down as I realized their path forward was entirely theirs. Consequences, legal boundaries, and exposure to reality would reveal character. I had ended the months of shielding them from their own decisions. The next choice David made could determine not just his immediate future, but the foundation of every relationship he held. The stakes had shifted. There was no turning back now. The control Jessica tried to wield had been stripped away, leaving only clear decisions and tangible consequences. He could embrace honesty or succumb to deception, but the path would be revealed soon. The next decision David makes could change everything. Will he stand for truth, or let deception control his life? Back at the hotel, I sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on the events of the morning. The police had taken every piece of evidence seriously, and the restraining order provided immediate legal protection. But the emotional weight of the confrontation with Jessica and the looming responsibilities toward David made it hard to relax. I opened my tablet again, reviewing my notes, carefully cataloging every interaction, every threat, every act of manipulation. Documentation had become essential. The truth was fragile when lies were being weaponized. Jessica's behavior was no longer just aggressive, it had evolved into a pattern of coercion and intimidation, and understanding that pattern meant recognizing the danger it posed. I made a mental note to contact Detective Martinez later that afternoon with any updates. The rest of the morning passed slowly, each minute weighted with anticipation. I knew that time was critical. The longer Jessica had to linger near Sunset Manor or attempt contact, the greater the risk. I paced a small room, imagining the possibilities, planning contingencies. One thing was clear: legal protections were only effective if supported by vigilance. I couldn't afford complacency. Around midday, the phone rang. It was Mike Stevens. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, voice steady as ever. She came back again. Tried to get past the front desk. I told her about the restraining order. She left, but she was agitated. I thanked him and made another note to forward the report to Detective Martinez. Each attempt Jessica made to violate the order provided more evidence of her recklessness and desperation. I needed to consider the financial implications as well. David's debts were becoming painfully apparent. Creditors had been contacting me because of false addresses he had supplied, but now the truth could be clarified. I started making calls, one by one. Each conversation was precise, factual, and calm. I confirmed with each creditor that David no longer resided at my property and that any financial obligations were his alone. The calls were exhausting, but necessary. Correcting misinformation prevented escalation and ensured legal clarity. By late afternoon, I had contacted multiple agencies, each call reinforcing the fact that David's web of deceit could no longer manipulate outcomes. As I returned to the hotel room, the weight of anticipation pressed on me. The restraining order, though empowering, was just one piece of the puzzle. Jessica's determination to maintain control was evident. I considered her psychology carefully. A person who thrived on manipulation would likely escalate when control was lost. Predictability became my tool. With her options narrowing, her actions were easier to anticipate. That afternoon, I documented everything in a secure file, detailing each threat, every attempt at intimidation, and all interactions with authorities. Later, I received a call from Jim Miller at Mountain Coffee. "Margaret, I need to be sure." "I understand," he said cautiously. "Are the stories David's been telling true?" I explained the facts succinctly. No breakdown, no family emergency, just manipulation and fabricated stories to gain control. Jim sighed, a mixture of relief and frustration in his voice. "I've known you for years, Margaret. This doesn't match who you are. We'll adjust accordingly at the shop. David will need to face the consequences." Each confirmation reinforced the reality of their actions. I realized that confronting the truth directly, without emotion or embellishment, was the only way to stabilize the situation. By evening, the stress and exhaustion were tangible. I allowed myself a brief respite, sitting quietly with a cup of tea, reflecting on the steps taken. Jessica's options were diminishing. Her desperation was manifesting in reckless behavior, and the restraining order had removed her ability to control me directly. My thoughts turned to David. He had a choice to make: acknowledge reality and accept responsibility, or continue in denial, letting loyalty to someone unworthy cloud his judgment. For 8 months, I had protected both of them from consequences. But now, that protection had ended. The boundaries I had set were firm, legal, and necessary. The following morning, I planned my next move. I would contact David directly, face to face, to clarify expectations and consequences. I needed him to understand the reality of the situation and take responsibility for his decisions. Jessica's exit from the equation did not absolve him of accountability. I wanted the conversation to focus entirely on clarity, honesty, and the choices he would make moving forward. Everything else, emotional manipulation, deceit, financial dependence, had been stripped away. When I called David, his voice carried tension, confusion, and a hint of fear. "Mom, there are people at the apartment asking about debts," he said. "They want to know about assets, income, everything." "I don't understand what's happening." I remained calm, explaining that these were natural consequences of borrowing without accountability. I clarified that none of the debts were mine and that the only misrepresentation had been the address he provided. David's panic was real, uncalculated. It was a first step toward understanding the impact of deception. The conversation ended with him acknowledging the truth, a subtle but significant shift from the manipulative patterns he had exhibited previously. The following hours were spent monitoring the situation at the apartment and Sunset Manor. Jessica had reacted to the restraining order with anger, attempting minor violations that only reinforced the evidence against her. Each interaction, each attempted contact, underscored her recklessness and provided clarity about her character. The unfolding reality was no longer abstract. It was tangible, visible, and undeniable. David had to decide: stand by the lies or embrace accountability. That evening, I reviewed everything again, documenting every detail and preparing for the next conversation with David. The groundwork was laid. Legal measures were in place, evidence was secured, and clarity had been established with creditors and authorities. The path forward was defined, but it required courage on David's part to follow it. I realized that sometimes protecting someone meant stepping back and allowing consequences to teach lessons that patience and indulgence could not. The choices he made in the next days would determine not just the immediate resolution but the foundation of his future relationships and his understanding of integrity. As night settled in, I prepared for the conversation that could change everything. I knew that the next moves would require honesty, courage, and acknowledgement of past mistakes. The stage was set for truth to emerge fully. But the question remained: would David have the strength to face it? The next confrontation with David would decide whether the lessons of these months were finally understood or ignored, leaving patterns of deception to continue unchecked. The next morning, I drove toward Corner Coffee with a mixture of anticipation and resolve. The sun glinted off the windshield, casting long morning shadows across the quiet streets. I arrived early, claiming the back table where we could speak privately, shielded from curious eyes and passing traffic. The air smelled faintly of brewed coffee and freshly baked pastries, a comforting contrast to the tension that had dominated the past days. I sipped my tea slowly, mentally preparing the conversation I had been rehearsing for hours. This meeting with David would be pivotal. It wasn't about anger or confrontation. It was about accountability, clarity, and the chance for him to start rebuilding trust. When David arrived, he looked older, wearied beyond his 26 years. Stress lines traced across his forehead, and his hands fidgeted with his phone nervously. He slid into the seat opposite me, and I could see the weight of recent events pressing on him. I allowed him a moment to breathe, to gather his scattered thoughts, before speaking. David, I began calmly, I've asked you to meet me today because this is a crucial moment. You have a choice to make: truth or continued denial. Your actions over the past 8 months have consequences, and this is your opportunity to confront them openly. David exhaled slowly, his voice low and hesitant. Mom, I know you're angry, but Jessica's lost her job, and the debt collectors won't stop. The calls, the visits, it's all overwhelming. I nodded, acknowledging his stress without letting it cloud the focus of the conversation. That's true, I said gently, but you need to understand that these consequences exist because of choices you and Jessica made. I've provided support for years, but that does not remove personal responsibility. His gaze dropped to the table, shame mixing with fear. I don't know what to do, he admitted quietly. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice even and firm. I'm offering you one chance to resolve this with dignity, David. This isn't about punishment, it's about truth, accountability, and the first steps toward rebuilding trust. His eyes lifted, confusion and curiosity mingling with apprehension. What exactly are you asking? He asked. I outlined my expectations clearly: public acknowledgement of the financial and personal support I had provided, transparency about the ultimatum and manipulations, and recognition of the ways his and Jessica's actions had endangered me and created legal complications. He flushed, embarrassment evident in his posture. You want me to humiliate myself? He whispered. I shook my head gently. No, David, I want honesty. There's a difference between humiliation and accountability. What you'll do is face the truth, acknowledge the support you received, and accept responsibility for the choices made. That's courage, not shame. His hand trembled slightly as he gripped his cup. The gravity of the situation was beginning to settle in. We spoke at length about the upcoming public disclosures. I detailed the steps required: church announcement, during sharing time, a letter to the Millfield Tribune editor, and a carefully worded Facebook post. Each communication would document the support provided, the manipulations faced, and the decision I had made to protect my dignity. David listened, silent at first, then slowly, comprehension and recognition replaced defensiveness. He realized that hiding, denying, or deflecting would only perpetuate damage. Mom, he said finally, voice raw, I understand why you left. I see it now. I really do. I don't want to lose you again. I met his gaze steadily. David, this isn't about losing me, it's about seeing clearly who Jessica is and how your choices affected all of us. My departure wasn't abandonment. It was setting boundaries. Boundaries that you need to understand and respect if we are ever to rebuild a real relationship. His shoulders slumped as relief mingled with regret. I didn't see it then, he admitted, voice trembling. I thought I was protecting you by following her. Protecting me? I asked gently. By obeying someone who threatened and manipulated me. That's not protection. That's complicity. Real protection is recognizing danger and acting responsibly. You have a choice now, David. A choice to stand for truth and integrity or continue in denial and manipulation. He nodded slowly, the weight of understanding settling in. I want to do the right thing, he said quietly, but I'm scared. People will judge, and I'll have to face my mistakes publicly. That's exactly why this matters, I said firmly. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's taking action despite it. You have the chance to correct the narrative, to restore some honesty to your life and our family. It won't erase mistakes, but it will start the process of rebuilding trust. His hands stopped fidgeting. His eyes, clear and vulnerable, met mine. I want to do it, Mom. I want to tell the truth. I need guidance. I smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and hope. You'll have my support. Not blind indulgence, Not escape from consequences, but guidance in facing reality and taking responsibility. That's the only way forward. We discussed the mechanics of the disclosures, the timing, and the specific language that would ensure transparency while remaining truthful and respectful. I emphasized that the objective wasn't shame or punishment for the mistakes made, but a clear acknowledgement of responsibility and an understanding of the consequences of deception. David absorbed every detail, his demeanor shifting from fear and guilt to determination. By the time we left the diner, the first seeds of accountability had been planted. David understood the stakes, and I could see a flicker of genuine willingness to change. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding trust is always a long, deliberate process. But for the first time in months, there was clarity, honesty, and an active choice to face reality. As I drove back home, I reflected on the day's events. Documentation, legal protections, public acknowledgement, and personal accountability were all essential components of the plan. Jessica's influence was waning, and the path for David to reclaim integrity was clear. The only variable now was his willingness to act. I knew that patience would be required, but the foundation had been laid. For the first time, the future felt manageable, predictable, and just. The coming days would test courage, honesty, and resolve. The choices David made next would determine not only the restoration of our relationship, but also the lessons he carried forward about integrity, accountability, and the true meaning of family. And while the path was challenging, it was also a rare opportunity, an opportunity to transform a pattern of manipulation into one of trust, respect, and mutual understanding. The next steps would force David to face public scrutiny, personal accountability, and a choice that could reshape the rest of his life. Would he have the courage to stand for truth, or would fear and loyalty to someone unworthy guide his actions once more? That evening, I returned to Sunset Manor, the quiet hum of the building a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded over the past week. The lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and the faint hint of coffee from the cafe downstairs. Mike, the night security guard, gave me a brief nod as I passed. I paused, thinking about how quickly situations could escalate, how fragile peace could be when someone determined to manipulate and intimidate refused to respect boundaries. Jessica's threats had been loud and aggressive, but her behavior had also been predictable. Now, with the restraining order in place, her options were limited, and I could finally focus on supporting David without fear of direct interference. That night, I prepared a detailed timeline of events. I opened my tablet and meticulously documented every confrontation, every threat, every manipulative act. Public outbursts, late-night calls, her escalating demands, they all had to be recorded. I knew that if anything escalated further, Detective Martinez would need concrete evidence. While organizing the notes, I couldn't help but reflect on the nature of manipulation, how it often appears subtle at first, but gradually tightens its grip until escape seems impossible. Writing it down gave me clarity, but it also reminded me of the months I had spent tiptoeing around someone else's control. The next morning, I called Detective Martinez to update him on Jessica's behavior. "Detective, she's been trying to approach my apartment again," I said, my voice calm but firm. "She left after the front desk refused entry, but she's clearly agitated." Martinez's voice was measured. "Keep a record of any contact attempts, Margaret. Forward me any messages or evidence immediately. The restraining order is legally binding, but enforcement relies on documentation." I hung up feeling reassured. The law was now firmly on my side, and while the emotional toll of these months had been heavy, the practical steps we'd taken would ensure safety. Later that afternoon, I returned to my former apartment to check on the neighborhood, knowing the tensions would attract attention. The sun cast warm golden light across the street, illuminating familiar buildings and landmarks. From my vantage point across the street, I could see the subtle signs of anxiety, neighbors peeking from windows, delivery drivers hesitating at doorways. The sight reminded me of how a single individual's manipulative behavior could ripple through an entire community, creating tension and unease far beyond the immediate circle. David called while I was observing from the car. Mom, I don't know what to do. People are coming to our old apartment asking about debts. I'm panicking. His voice carried genuine fear, a stark contrast to the calculated responses he had shown during prior confrontations. I guided him through the process. Clear explanations, honesty about ownership, and no provision of personal or financial information beyond the truth. David, I said, you're not responsible for their mistakes, but you are responsible for how you respond. Truth is your armor now. He nodded, absorbing the advice with trembling gratitude. As the days passed, I continued monitoring developments. Creditors visited, letters arrived, and a few neighbors called with concern. I kept records meticulously, noting each interaction and the manner in which David handled them. It was clear that this exposure was painful for him, but necessary. Accountability was a harsh teacher, but its lessons were indispensable. By keeping evidence and being proactive, I ensured that neither Jessica nor her manipulations could exploit ambiguity. Wednesday arrived with a mix of tension and anticipation. I had prepared the documents for the court, the restraining order, and all supporting evidence. Detective Martinez confirmed that the sheriff would serve Jessica promptly. By noon, the papers had been delivered, and the legal system had stepped in to reinforce boundaries. This intervention changed the dynamics completely. Jessica could no longer harass or intimidate, and David had a clearer understanding of consequences. I felt a rare moment of relief. Control, at least legally and structurally, had been restored. While handling these legal and financial matters, I also reflected on the emotional landscape. For months, my relationship with David had been overshadowed by manipulation, fear, and unspoken expectations. His loyalty to someone who had demonstrated manipulation over kindness had eroded trust. Yet, I saw a flicker of hope now. The next steps for him required not only accountability but also courage, the courage to face public disclosure, the courage to own his choices, and the courage to separate himself from toxic influence. That evening, I drove past our former apartment, observing subtle shifts in behavior. Jessica had not returned, and the building felt noticeably calmer. I made a mental note to continue monitoring from a distance, ensuring that no further harassment occurred while David had space to process and act responsibly. Across the street, familiar neighbors nodded politely, a silent acknowledgement of the disruption's resolution and the ongoing efforts to restore normalcy. Thursday morning, I sat at my lakeside cottage, the soft lapping of water against a dock providing a soothing backdrop. My thoughts were on strategy and outcomes, how the next actions, both legal and personal, would shape David's understanding of responsibility. I drafted emails to creditors detailing ownership and residence information, correcting the false statements David and Jessica had previously made. I felt a quiet satisfaction in seeing the truth finally set into motion. David called again later in the day. Mom, I've been thinking a lot, he said. I know I need to make public acknowledgments. I want to do it right. I just don't know if I can. I reassured him. You can, David. It's about honesty, not perfection. The first step is admitting the truth, then everything else will follow. His voice softened, hope mingling with anxiety. I sensed the beginning of a real shift in his perspective, a willingness to face consequences rather than evade them. By evening, I felt the first true sense of relief in months. Legal protections were in place, David was beginning to grasp responsibility, and Jessica's manipulative reach had been curtailed. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but for the first time, the path forward was clear. I reflected on the months of endurance, documentation, and courage required to reach this point. It had been exhausting emotionally and mentally, but the foundation for justice, accountability, and eventual reconciliation had been laid. With the legal measures in place and David facing the reality of accountability, the next steps would test his courage, force public acknowledgement, and determine whether he could finally choose integrity over fear and manipulation. The coming days would reveal if he was truly ready to embrace the truth and reclaim trust. Friday morning arrived with a crisp clarity that contrasted sharply with the tension lingering over the past week. I sipped coffee on my porch, the sunlight glinting across the lake, and reflected on how carefully the previous days had been managed. The restraining order against Jessica provided legal security, but I knew that accountability for David was still pending. I needed him to confront his choices fully, and that meant allowing him the space to act, to face consequences, and to make public acknowledgement of the reality he had avoided for so long. I spent the morning reviewing my records, double-checking dates, messages, and security footage. Every interaction Jessica had orchestrated, the public confrontations, the subtle intimidation tactics, the false claims of pregnancy and medical emergencies, was catalogued with precision. This process, though time-consuming, was critical. If there was even a hint of dispute in the coming days, these records would provide irrefutable evidence of patterns of manipulation and premeditation. Knowing that I had a solid foundation gave me a rare sense of calm. Around mid-morning, Mike from Sunset Manor called. Mrs. Patterson, she tried approaching the lobby again. Said she wanted to talk things out. I listened carefully, then calmly replied, "Mike, do not let her pass the front desk. Document her attempts. Forward anything suspicious to Detective Martinez immediately." The discipline of adhering strictly to legal measures was a new experience for me, but necessary. Any deviation could allow Jessica to exploit loopholes or generate new opportunities for intimidation. By noon, I prepared for a phone call with Karen Webb at Millfield Credit Union. David's debt issues needed clarity, and I had to correct any misinformation. I dialed her number, my voice calm but assertive. "Miss Webb, I'm calling regarding David Patterson. He no longer resides at my address and has no legal claim to the property. If you need him, he works at Mountain Coffee on First Street. Please update your records." She paused briefly, then acknowledged the correction. The conversation, though brief, was essential. It ensured that creditors no longer mistakenly associated David with my property, a critical step in protecting both my assets and his path toward accountability. Next, I contacted Pacific Collection Services. "This is Margaret Patterson. I'm calling regarding David Patterson. He has no ownership interest in my property and is no longer living here. Any inquiries should be directed appropriately." Each call followed the same pattern: factual, professional, precise. By the afternoon, 4 collection agencies had been notified, all misinformation corrected. I felt a growing satisfaction knowing that David's web of false addresses and manipulated debts was beginning to unravel. That evening, I drove past my former apartment. From a distance, I could observe subtle movements inside, the frustration, confusion, and heated arguments between David and Jessica. Neighbors glanced nervously from windows and doorways. I felt a mixture of detachment and relief. While it was painful to witness, it was also necessary. Exposure to consequences, though uncomfortable, often forced clarity and growth. Thursday night, I made a careful review of my strategy. With the restraining order in place, creditors notified, and security evidence documented, the next critical step was ensuring David's readiness for public acknowledgement. He had to face the truth, squarely, openly, without deflection or excuse. I drafted notes outlining what needed to be disclosed: financial contributions, sacrifices made, and the ultimatum that forced my departure. These notes were for his reference, not mine. My role now was guidance and oversight, not correction. The following morning, I received a text from David. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot. I know I need to acknowledge everything publicly, but I'm nervous. What if I falter?" I typed back carefully. "David, this is about truth, not perfection. Speak honestly, and the community will understand. Courage is showing up and telling what actually happened, even when it's difficult." I felt his hesitation, the residual fear of judgment, but also the beginnings of acceptance. Friday afternoon, I visited the corner diner to make final arrangements for a private conversation with David. We would meet away from the apartment, away from creditors, and outside the stress of his immediate environment. When I arrived, I chose a secluded table in the back, facing away from the street. I needed him to focus entirely on the conversation, not on what others might see or think. Minutes later, David arrived, appearing older than his 26 years, his face lined with tension and uncertainty. He slid into the booth across from me, eyes downcast. "I know you're angry, Mom," he began, "but I don't know where to start. Jessica lost her job, the debt collectors keep calling, and everything feels like it's falling apart." I waited until he finished before speaking. "David, this is your chance to reclaim honesty, integrity, and responsibility. Public acknowledgement isn't humiliation, it's accountability. It's the first step toward rebuilding trust." He nodded, fidgeting with his phone, digesting the weight of my words. We spent hours discussing the specifics: college tuition, wedding expenses, apartment ownership, and the ultimatum that forced my departure. Each detail was necessary to paint a full picture, to provide a factual, transparent record of events. I emphasized that his acknowledgement had to be complete, public, and sincere. There could be no omissions, no euphemisms, no partial truths. Only full accountability would restore any chance of rebuilding our relationship. By the end of the meeting, David seemed exhausted but resolved. He understood that the coming days would test him morally, emotionally, and socially. He needed to demonstrate courage by speaking openly in front of the congregation, posting publicly on social media, and submitting a transparent letter to the newspaper. I felt a quiet pride seeing him grasp the magnitude of responsibility he had previously avoided. That evening, I returned to the lakeside cottage, reflecting on how far we had come. The legal measures were in place, David had begun confronting reality, and Jessica's manipulative influence was contained. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the water, watching ducks glide calmly across the surface. The stillness was a sharp contrast to the turbulence of the past weeks, a reminder that patience, strategy, and dignity were powerful allies in restoring order to a chaotic situation. With accountability now in David's hands, the coming days would determine whether he could rise above fear and manipulation, confront the truth publicly, and take the first steps toward rebuilding trust and integrity. The next moments were crucial, and every choice would carry lasting consequences. Saturday morning dawned clear and brisk, the sunlight spilling over the lake and illuminating the cottage garden where I had begun to regain a sense of calm. I moved slowly through my morning routine, savoring a cup of coffee and the silence of my own space. There was no pressure, no demands, no sudden knocks on the door or unexpected phone calls from creditors. For the first time in months, I felt grounded. Yet, my mind remained partially occupied with thoughts of David and the steps he needed to take in the coming days. Courage and honesty would determine the trajectory of our relationship, and the responsibility rested squarely on his shoulders. I reviewed my notes once more, the meticulous documentation of every financial contribution, ultimatum, and interaction with Jessica. My focus was on clarity, ensuring that when David publicly acknowledged the reality of his choices, there would be no confusion or room for misinterpretation. Each payment made, each sacrifice endured, had to be represented accurately. This was not about retribution or shame. It was about truth, transparency, and setting boundaries that had long been ignored. By mid-morning, I received a text from David. "Mom, I'm nervous about tomorrow. What if people judge me? What if I falter?" I typed back deliberately, "David, truth is never shameful. Courage is speaking honestly when the stakes are high. Do not worry about judgment. Focus on honesty. That is the only thing that matters." I sensed a tension in his words, a residual fear that had been cultivated over months of manipulation and avoidance. Yet, beneath it, there was the flicker of resolve, a willingness to face consequences he had long evaded. Around noon, I returned to the corner diner to finalize the logistics with David. We chose a table at the back, away from the main crowd, allowing for privacy and concentration. David arrived, face tense, eyes avoiding mine, yet with an unmistakable determination. We began reviewing the public acknowledgement, college tuition, wedding contributions, the apartment, utility payments, and the ultimatum that had precipitated my departure. I emphasized the necessity of complete transparency. Partial truths, euphemisms, or omissions would undermine the sincerity of the effort. Only full accountability would suffice to rebuild trust. We practiced phrasing, the rhythm of honesty, and the steadiness of delivery. I stressed that tone, clarity, and specificity were crucial. This was not a performance. It was a declaration of responsibility, a public commitment to acknowledging past mistakes. David's face betrayed both fear and the beginnings of comprehension. He understood the magnitude of the task and the long-term implications of failure or hesitation. After hours of discussion, David seemed more composed, his voice steadier, his gestures more confident. The weight of previous manipulation began to lift as he internalized the importance of accountability. I could see the shift, the transition from avoidance to acceptance. While the day ahead would test him, these hours had provided the preparation and reinforcement necessary to confront the congregation with honesty and clarity. That evening, I returned to the cottage, preparing my space for a calm night. The lake reflected gold and pink from the setting sun, the ducks gliding across the water with effortless grace. The tranquility contrasted sharply with the chaos that had engulfed the past 8 months, a reminder that patience and preparation had tangible rewards. I reviewed my own feelings, pride in David's willingness to face the truth, satisfaction in the legal protections that now secured my home, and anticipation for the public acknowledgement that would provide closure. Late that evening, I received a brief text from Detective Martinez. Jessica hasn't been seen since yesterday. All legal notices served. Situation stable. Keep monitoring. I replied with a quiet relief, knowing that while her immediate threats were contained, the final step involved David's public acknowledgement and the restoration of dignity and boundaries. Jessica's departure, whether permanent or temporary, removed immediate danger but did not absolve past manipulations or false claims. I spent the remainder of the evening organizing my own records, ensuring that any potential questions from the community or congregation could be answered accurately and calmly. Documentation of payments, interactions, and ultimatums was thorough, leaving no gaps. This preparation was both practical and psychological. It reinforced my own sense of control and clarity while providing David with the confidence to speak without hesitation or fear of contradiction. Saturday night, I walked along the lake shore, reflecting on the lessons learned. 8 months of manipulation, ungrateful dependence, and confrontation had been exhausting, yet each challenge provided insight into resilience, boundaries, and the importance of truth. The weight of previous stress was tempered by anticipation, a measured hope that David would rise to the occasion, that accountability and honesty would finally guide the next phase of our relationship. I returned to the cottage, the air cooling, and the lake darkening with the night. My journal rested on the table, filled with observations, records, and strategies. I reviewed the entries carefully, appreciating how meticulous documentation had provided both legal and emotional clarity. This preparation, combined with steadfast adherence to boundaries, ensured that the next day, the day of public acknowledgement, would be grounded in truth, accountability, and dignity. Rehook. Sunday would be the ultimate test. Would David confront the reality of his choices publicly, embrace accountability, and demonstrate courage in the eyes of the community, or would fear and loyalty to Jessica prevail? The coming hours would reveal the depth of his character and determine the path forward for both our family and the lives we had struggled to protect. Sunday morning arrived crisp and bright, the kind of morning that carried both promise and tension in equal measure. I dressed deliberately, choosing a simple, elegant outfit that reflected calm authority. The walk to St. Paul's Methodist Church was peaceful, yet my mind buzzed with anticipation. This day would mark the culmination of months of preparation, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to truth. Every step felt significant, as though the quiet streets themselves were bearing witness to the journey that had brought us here. Upon entering the sanctuary, the atmosphere was charged with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Regular attendees whispered quietly among themselves, sensing that something important was about to unfold. I moved toward my usual pew 4 rows from the front, careful to choose a spot that allowed me to observe without distraction. The congregation had grown slightly larger than normal, likely due to circulating rumors that some form of family acknowledgement or announcement would take place. I felt a surge of resolve. This was not about gossip or spectacle. It was about confronting reality openly and honestly. The service began with familiar hymns and readings, but my focus remained on the aisle, waiting for David's arrival. I could see the subtle glances, the curious stares, as people anticipated the moment when the truth would emerge. Each hymn felt like a prelude, each prayer a soft reminder of the moral responsibility and the ethical gravity of the coming acknowledgement. My thoughts traced back over the months of planning, the ultimatums, the financial support, the threats, and the manipulations. I had endured it all patiently, recording every interaction, every payment, and every detail that would ensure clarity. And just as at last, David emerged from the back, looking smaller than usual as he navigated the center aisle. The nervousness in his steps was evident, yet he moved with determination, gripping the edges of the podium and taking a deep breath before speaking. His eyes swept over familiar faces, friends and neighbors who had watched our family dynamics unfold without full understanding. He began in a steady voice, hesitant at first but growing stronger as he embraced the responsibility he had long avoided. "I need to tell you all something important about my mother," he said, his voice carried, clear and deliberate, across the silent sanctuary. "For the past 8 months, Margaret Patterson has been supporting my wife and me financially. She paid $15,000 for my college education when I could have gone to a trade school for free. She paid $8,000 for my wedding, covering costs that my wife's family could not afford. She provided the family apartment, where her parents lived and where my father and I lived for many years. She paid our rent, utilities, phone service, and food, all while living on Social Security." A ripple of murmurs passed through the congregation, confirming that people were fully grasping the magnitude of her contributions. David's voice gained strength with each detail, each number, painting a vivid picture of generosity, patience, and unwavering support. He continued, recounting the ultimatum issued 3 weeks prior: "Obey Jessica or leave the apartment." "My mother chose to leave rather than surrender her dignity," he declared. The room fell silent, the weight of the words settling over the assembly. Babies quieted, older attendees leaned forward, and even the pastor's eyes glistened with emotion. David looked directly at me, a moment of vulnerability and connection bridging the months of tension. I stood by and watched my wife disrespect the woman who sacrificed her retirement security for our comfort. I chose loyalty to someone who threatened my mother over loyalty to the woman who raised me with love and patience. I was wrong. Jessica was wrong. My mother deserved gratitude and respect, and instead we gave her ultimatums and demands. "I am sorry." The congregation erupted into supportive murmurs, some standing, some reaching forward with hands extended, acknowledging the courage it took to speak openly and honestly. Pastor Johnson approached the podium, his voice breaking slightly. "Sometimes the hardest courage is admitting our mistakes publicly. David has shown that courage today, and his mother has shown us what dignity looks like under pressure." After the service, people approached me with hugs, handshakes, and words of support. Mrs. Chan, a longtime neighbor, squeezed my hand. "We suspected you were helping them financially, Margaret. What we didn't know was how they repaid your kindness." Tom from the coffee shop patted my shoulder, admiration in his eyes. "That took real character what you did. Setting boundaries with family isn't easy." David approached last, hesitant but sincere. "Mom, the letter to the Tribune will run Wednesday. The Facebook post is going up tonight. Jessica left town yesterday, packed her car while I was at work, and disappeared without a forwarding address or note." I wasn't surprised. Women like Jessica always ran when confronted with consequences. He continued quietly, "I filed for divorce this morning. I found out she was planning to take money from my work register. The debts are worse than we thought." 3 months later, I watched from the front yard as 3 families of domestic violence survivors moved into transitional housing units at the Millfield Women's Shelter. The building had been renovated into separate apartments, each family enjoying privacy while sharing communal spaces. Maria Santos, a mother recently escaped from an abusive relationship, directed her children toward the playground equipment. "Mrs. Patterson, this opportunity means everything to us. Thank you for choosing survivors for this gift." Survivors understand courage, I replied. This building should serve people who have actually earned it. My own life had settled into peaceful routines at the lakeside cottage I purchased with money no longer flowing to ungrateful dependents. Morning coffee on the porch overlooking the lake, afternoon gardening, evening reading. Simple pleasures that felt luxurious after months of financial stress and family drama. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Mom, I'm 3 months into counseling and learning about healthy relationships. Could we try having coffee sometime? I want to earn your trust back, one conversation at a time. I smiled, observing ducks gliding across the water. He had kept his word with public acknowledgments, and more importantly, he was taking responsibility for rebuilding our relationship. I replied, coffee sounds good. Saturday morning at the diner, his response was immediate. I'll be there. And Mom, thank you for not giving up on me completely. I set my phone aside, watching the ducks with their babies, reflecting on how patience and dignity had been rewarded. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the lake gold and pink, while laughter from the women's shelter filled the distance. Justice had been served, dignity preserved, and a son was finally taking the first steps to earn back trust through honesty and effort. Rehook. The path to rebuilding trust is never simple, but sometimes the courage to face truth and take responsibility can heal even the deepest wounds, showing that patience and integrity are always worth the wait. The following Saturday morning, I arrived early at the diner, choosing a booth tucked into the corner where we could talk privately without interruption. The smell of fresh coffee and baked goods filled the air, the soft chatter of morning patrons providing a comforting backdrop to what promised to be a significant conversation. I sipped my coffee, steadying my thoughts, reflecting on how much had changed in just a few months. The tension from the past 8 months still lingered, but I was determined to focus on rebuilding, on guiding David toward clarity and responsibility. David arrived on time, looking nervous yet determined. The stress lines that had marked his face during church were still present, but there was a subtle shift in his posture, a quiet acknowledgement of the accountability he now faced. He slid into the booth across from me, his hands resting on the table, and took a deep breath. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, about how I let things get out of control, and how I failed to see Jessica for who she really was. His voice was low but firm, carrying the weight of self-reflection and the first stirrings of genuine remorse. I nodded, encouraging him to continue. David, it's not enough to just recognize the mistakes. Actions need to follow words. Trust has to be rebuilt, not assumed. Are you ready for that? He hesitated for a moment, the reality of responsibility settling in. I want to be, he said finally. I've started counseling, and I'm learning how to approach relationships differently. I want to show you that I can act with honesty and integrity. I could see the sincerity in his eyes, the flicker of the boy I had once known, tempered now by the lessons life had forced upon him. We spent the next hour discussing practical steps. I outlined expectations clearly, complete transparency, accountability for finances, and proactive communication about decisions that could affect both our lives. David listened intently, asking questions, clarifying details, and committing to a structured plan for rebuilding trust. There were moments of tension, moments when old patterns threatened to resurface, but we worked through them, emphasizing the need for patience and consistent effort. The diner's quiet corners and familiar hum provided the perfect environment for this delicate conversation, free from judgment and distractions. After our discussion, we walked outside together, enjoying the crisp morning air. David seemed lighter somehow, as though admitting responsibility and outlining a path forward had relieved some of the internal pressure he had carried for months. He asked about the women's shelter, curious about the families now occupying the apartment that had once been the battleground of manipulation and financial dependence. I explained how the building had been renovated and organized, providing privacy while still encouraging mutual support among survivors. It's a place of hope, I said, a place where courage and resilience are recognized and nurtured. His face softened, understanding the broader significance of the decision that had initially angered him. We parted that morning with plans to meet regularly, a schedule designed to reinforce accountability and nurture the fragile trust we were working to rebuild. As I drove back to my cottage, the morning sun reflected off the lake in a dazzling display of gold and pink, reminding me that life, like the water, could shift and settle with time and care. The days ahead would require continued diligence, but there was hope, a tangible sense that the bonds of family could be repaired when approached with honesty and integrity. Later that week, I received a letter from the Tribune confirming the publication date for David's acknowledgement. The letter to the editor was thorough, detailing the financial support I had provided and the circumstances surrounding the ultimatum and Jessica's manipulations. The newspaper's circulation would ensure that the truth reached the community, correcting the narrative that had been distorted by lies and selfish ambition. Alongside this, the Facebook post went live, generating hundreds of supportive comments from neighbors and friends who had witnessed portions of the struggle but were unaware of the full scope. David monitored the responses, visibly affected by the recognition of accountability and the support it fostered. During this same week, I made a point to visit the women's shelter. Watching Maria Santos and her children play safely in the courtyard was a profound reminder of the value of clear boundaries, thoughtful generosity, and the empowerment that comes from supporting those who truly need it. I spoke briefly with the shelter's director, ensuring that all arrangements were functioning smoothly and that each family felt secure and respected in their new home. Each smile, each laugh from the children reinforced the significance of choosing purpose over enabling, action over passive compassion. At home, I returned to my routines with a sense of satisfaction. Morning coffee on the porch, tending the garden, preparing meals, reading by the lake. These small, deliberate actions grounded me, reminding me that peace was both a choice and a reward after months of turbulence. Occasionally, I would receive updates from David, brief messages confirming his adherence to our agreed-upon structure, small victories in honesty, and consistent communication. Each message reinforced the fragile but growing trust between us, a reminder that redemption required effort, not expectation. By the end of the week, David's progress was evident. He demonstrated thoughtful decision-making, open communication, and an emerging maturity that had been absent in previous months. It was clear that his counseling was having a meaningful impact, helping him navigate the complex emotions tied to betrayal, accountability, and reconciliation. He understood that rebuilding our relationship would be a gradual process, requiring patience, humility, and a consistent demonstration of integrity. The broader community also seemed to respond positively. Friends, neighbors, and former colleagues acknowledged the public acknowledgement of truth, offering encouragement and validation. There were moments of pride and relief, both for me and for David, as we realized that confronting deception, setting boundaries, and demanding accountability could restore dignity without fostering bitterness or resentment. Rehook. True healing begins when responsibility is embraced and honesty becomes the foundation for every action. Without it, even love and loyalty can become fragile illusions, but with it, trust can be rebuilt, stronger than ever. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of day that suggested fresh beginnings. I walked along the path to my lakeside cottage, enjoying the stillness, the gentle ripple of water reflecting the soft gold of the rising sun. Even after months of turmoil, these moments of peace reminded me why boundaries and integrity were non-negotiable. The phone buzzed in my pocket. David's name flashed across the screen. I answered, curious about the progress he had made since our last meeting. Mom, I wanted to let you know I completed the first set of exercises from counseling. I'm learning how to identify manipulation and communicate effectively. It's harder than I thought, but I think I'm finally starting to understand. His voice carried a mix of nervousness and resolve. I could hear the sincerity behind each word, a quiet testament to the steps he was taking to reclaim his own agency and repair what had been broken. We spent the next half hour discussing practical ways he could reinforce honesty with Jessica. He admitted it was difficult to separate his emotions from the situation, But he had realized that hiding or rationalizing actions would only prolong the harm. "I'm seeing now," he said, "that choosing comfort over truth only delayed my growth and hurt everyone involved, especially you." I reminded him that growth was measured not in words alone, but in actions over time, in consistent decisions that aligned with integrity. He listened intently, nodding, absorbing each point as if it were a blueprint for rebuilding his character. Later that afternoon, I drove to the Millfield Women's Shelter to check on the progress of the families in the transitional apartments. Maria Santos and her children had adapted remarkably well. The laughter of the children and the warm interactions among the mothers was a testament to the resilience and strength that came from living in an environment built on respect and empowerment. I spoke briefly with Maria about the importance of setting boundaries and the courage it took to reclaim control of one's life. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, her eyes glistening with emotion, "this opportunity has changed our lives. You've given us more than a place to live. You've shown us that courage, dignity, and self-respect can thrive even after the darkest times." Her words resonated deeply, reinforcing the principles that had guided my decisions throughout this ordeal. Generosity, yes, but never enabling deception or manipulation. Back at the cottage, I settled into my routine with renewed clarity. The garden, the morning coffee rituals, the evenings spent reading by the lake, they weren't luxuries, they were anchors, reminders that peace and stability were achievable even after months of chaos. Occasionally, David's texts would arrive, short but deliberate, noting milestones in counseling, moments of personal insight, or progress in setting boundaries with Jessica. Each message carried a quiet power, a reminder that accountability was being internalized rather than superficially performed. By midweek, the impact of David's acknowledgement in the community became more visible. Friends and neighbors reached out with comments of support and relief, acknowledging that the truth had finally been shared and justice had been restored. The Tribune's letter and the Facebook post had not only cleared my name but had also highlighted the importance of integrity and transparency. David began to understand the social responsibility that came with honesty and the long-term effects of his choices on those around him. Each supportive message and conversation further reinforced the lessons we had been working so hard to instill. In parallel, the women's shelter continued to thrive. I spent several mornings helping organize donations, arranging educational materials for the children, and coordinating schedules for the mothers so that they could attend workshops and counseling sessions. Seeing these families grow in confidence and stability offered a profound sense of fulfillment. The decisions I had made regarding boundaries and financial support now bore tangible, positive results, proof that protecting one's dignity while offering meaningful assistance could create lasting change. David and I scheduled another in-person meeting at the diner that Friday. The atmosphere was warmer than before. The winter sun reflected off the windows, highlighting small glimmers of hope in our conversation. David appeared more confident, having practiced communication techniques from counseling and prepared concrete examples of how he would approach future challenges responsibly. We reviewed finances, discussed ongoing strategies for accountability, and even rehearsed how he would handle potential encounters with Jessica should she attempt to return or manipulate the situation remotely. He recognized the importance of foresight and consistency, understanding that one misstep could undo months of progress. After our discussion, we took a quiet walk around the block. The simple act of walking side by side without tension or argument was a small but significant victory. We spoke about future plans, career choices, and even the possibility of rebuilding trust with mutual friends who had been caught in the middle of Jessica's schemes. David's reflections were thoughtful, often tinged with the humility and insight that had been missing during the months of manipulation and conflict. For the first time in a long time, it felt as though he was beginning to see the consequences of actions rather than simply the outcomes he desired. That evening, I received another update from the women's shelter. One of the mothers had secured a part-time job and was enrolling her children in local schools, the first steps toward a self-sufficient life. Another mother had completed a course in conflict resolution and parenting, demonstrating that boundaries and responsibility were becoming second nature. These tangible improvements underscored the importance of deliberate and meaningful intervention, helping those who truly deserved it, while withholding resources from those whose motives were self-serving. It was a lesson I hope David was internalizing as he navigated his own path toward accountability and maturity. Throughout the week, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. From the threats, deception, and ultimatums to the restraining order, public acknowledgments, and steady rebuilding of trust, the path had been fraught with challenges. Yet each step reinforced a fundamental truth: integrity, boundaries, and deliberate action were essential for survival, growth, and meaningful relationships. I realized that patience and persistence, while difficult, had allowed both justice and compassion to coexist. Real transformation comes not from forced obedience or surface-level apologies, but from consistent accountability, courageous truth-telling, and the daily practice of integrity, proving that even the deepest wounds can begin to heal when actions finally match words. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of crisp day that seemed to promise resolution. I dressed calmly and made my way to St. Paul's Methodist Church, anticipation tightening my chest despite the serenity outside. The sanctuary was more crowded than usual. Whispers circulated, hinting that something important would be shared. I took my usual pew 4 rows from the front, focusing on the familiar wooden kneelers and sunlight streaming through the stained glass. Time passed slowly, my mind wandering through the months of turmoil, the endless nights of worry, the manipulation, the ultimatums, and the subtle victories that had brought me here. The sound of the organ swelled through the church, followed by the warm cadence of hymns, drawing the congregation into collective focus. My eyes continually scanned the back, searching for David. Finally, he stood from the rear pew. He seemed smaller, fragile even, but his steps were deliberate and unwavering as he walked down the center aisle. Each stride was a quiet statement of courage, each breath a testament to the internal reckoning he had endured. At the podium, he gripped the edges tightly, his knuckles white with tension, and looked across the room at familiar faces he had known his entire life. He drew in a deep breath, and the voice that emerged carried clarity, honesty, and an acknowledgement of the truth we had fought to protect. "I need to tell you all something important about my mother," he began, and every head turned, the sanctuary holding a collective breath. His words cut through the hushed air like sunlight piercing fog. "For the past 8 months, Margaret Patterson has been supporting my wife and me financially. She paid $15,000 for my college education, when I could have gone to trade school for free. She paid $8,000 for my wedding when Jessica's family couldn't afford their share." Murmurs spread through the pews, the congregation absorbing the specific sacrifices that painted a picture of unwavering love and patience. David continued, steadily, his voice gaining strength with every word. "She gave us her family apartment, the place where her parents lived, where she lived with my father for 15 years. When we couldn't make rent payments, she covered them. When we needed food, utilities, phone service, she provided everything, all while living on Social Security." A profound silence fell, the weight of truth filling the sanctuary. He recounted the ultimatum that had precipitated the conflict, describing Jessica's demands for obedience over respect. 3 weeks ago, when my mother wouldn't follow my wife's orders like a servant, we gave her an ultimatum: obey Jessica or leave her own home. Mom chose to leave rather than surrender her dignity. The words resonated, echoing across decades of shared history, the congregation fully aware of the stakes, the courage, and the moral clarity of her decision. He spoke with honesty and accountability, never minimizing the damage, never rationalizing the choices made, simply stating facts that everyone could witness and comprehend. David looked directly at me, eyes glistening with real tears. "I'm standing here because my mother offered me one last chance to choose truth over pride. I was wrong. Jessica was wrong. My mother deserved gratitude and respect. Instead, we gave her ultimatums and demands. Mom, I'm sorry isn't enough for what we put you through, but I hope it's a start." The congregation responded with supportive murmurs and quiet applause, some wiping tears from their eyes. Pastor Johnson approached the podium, his own voice thick with emotion. Sometimes the hardest courage is admitting our mistakes publicly. David has shown that courage today, and his mother has shown us what dignity looks like under pressure. After the service, people approached with hugs, handshakes, and words of heartfelt appreciation. Mrs. Chen, a longtime neighbor, squeezed my hand. "We all suspected you were helping them financially, Margaret, but we didn't realize the extent or the sacrifices you made." Tom from the coffee shop added, "That took real character. Setting boundaries isn't easy when family is involved, but you showed exactly how it should be done." Each interaction reinforced that integrity and dignity, when coupled with deliberate action, earned lasting respect. David approached me outside, the sun glinting off the glass of the windows, highlighting his youth and vulnerability. He hesitated, then spoke quietly. "The letter to the Tribune will run Wednesday. The Facebook post went up last night. Jessica left town yesterday, packed her car while I was at work and disappeared. No forwarding address, no note, nothing." I wasn't surprised. Women like Jessica always ran when confronted with consequences. David added, "I filed for divorce this morning. Found out she'd been planning to take money from my work register. The debts are worse than we thought." 3 months later, I stood in the front yard of my former apartment building, watching 3 families of domestic violence survivors move into their new apartments at the Millfield Women's Shelter. The building had been renovated into separate units, each family enjoying privacy but sharing common spaces designed to foster community and safety. Maria Santos, recently escaped from abuse, directed her children toward the playground equipment, their laughter ringing across the yard. "Mrs. Patterson, this opportunity means everything to us. Thank you for choosing survivors for this gift." I smiled, watching the joy and determination radiate from these families. "Survivors understand courage," I replied. "This building is for those who have earned it through resilience, strength, and the determination to start anew." My own life had settled into quiet routines at the lakeside cottage I purchased with the freedom reclaimed from months of ungrateful dependency. Morning coffee on the porch overlooking the lake, afternoons in the garden, evenings lost in books, simple pleasures that felt luxurious after months of tension and manipulation. The cottage was modest yet perfect for my needs: 2 bedrooms, a functional kitchen, and a garden abundant with vegetables. The lake mirrored the sky, a constant reminder of the stability I had fought to preserve. David's messages arrived periodically, updates on his counseling progress and efforts to rebuild trust. "Mom, I'm 3 months into counseling and learning a lot about healthy relationships. Could we try having coffee sometime? I'd like to earn your trust back, one conversation at a time." I smiled at the thought. The public acknowledgments, the Tribune letter, the Facebook post, they had done their work, clearing the misunderstandings and laying a foundation for accountability. I replied simply, "Coffee sounds good." Saturday morning at the diner, his immediate response was heartfelt. "I'll be there. Thank you for not giving up on me completely." I set the phone aside, watching the ducks glide across the lake, ducklings following behind in a perfect line. Patience and dignity had been rewarded. Justice had been served. Relationships had been tested and slowly rebuilt on honesty rather than manipulation. The sun set over the mountains, painting the lake gold and pink, and in the distance, the laughter of children at the women's shelter reminded me that courage, truth, and integrity had lasting, tangible consequences. The story of betrayal, manipulation, and difficult choices had reached its conclusion, leaving lessons in resilience, accountability, and the profound impact of protecting one's dignity while helping those who truly deserved it. If you enjoyed this story, please like,